Hey there, it's Jeannie, and I'm back to share another card. Today I'm using My Favorite Things Stamps Space Explorer stamp set. I've had this stamp set in my collection for a really long time, and I've never pulled it out, and I'm not really sure why, because these images are super cute for a great scene. For the images that I'm using, I'm placing them into my MISTI and stamping them using Memento Tuxedo black ink. I'll stamp these twice just to make sure that I get a nice dark impression, and the MISTI helps me do that. For these images, I don't have the coordinating dies, so I ran them through my scan and cut, and they cut them for me. And I really like how quick and easy it is, and it cuts up against the line, which I prefer. I usually don't really like the dies anyway. Before my scan and cut, I would prefer to fussy cut everything, and you can imagine how long that takes. The only addition that I do when I run it through my scan and cut is use a tuxedo black marker to line the edges so that it doesn't have any white peeking. For the coloring, all my colors that I'm using will be listed down below, but I mainly stick with a very simple color palette. I'm doing a gray spacesuit with pops of red and a little blue, and the planets will have a little bit more color, but not too much. And I'll stick with this color palette later for the galaxy I'm creating. So for today's card, I'm basing it off of an inspiration from Jennifer McGuire, who has done two tutorials creating tunnel cards. And I really like that idea. So her tutorial made it such a simple and easy card to create, and the instructions are super easy to follow. So if you're interested in watching her video, I'll link it down below as well. And I'll run through the steps of creating the tunnel card as well in this video, but hers are definitely a lot more detailed, and she shows multiple examples for them. And I really like the tunnel card idea, but I did want to put my own personal spin on it, and I add an extra interactive element to it, and I think it makes this card pretty unique. So I color both of the astronauts the same. One will be on the outside and one will be on the inside. For the planets, I decided to add a few pops of colors here and there. The moon is just going to be gray, but I do opt to use a warm gray versus a cool gray, like for the astronaut suit. For the planet that has the rings, I had some trouble because I really liked the orange, but then it kind of got lost when I tried to do a darker orange, so I ended up adding a brown ring. For that blue planet, I thought that that was just a easy one, so I just colored it up using two colors. And for the spaceship, I wanted it to match the astronaut, so I used the same colors, the red and the gray. For the little stars, I kept it the same as the balloons, and they're just a typical yellow for stars. When I finish coloring, I'll move on to the two parts of the tunnel card. And I'll start with a piece of dark navy blue cardstock that I'll cut in half at 5.5. I'll create a card base per usual, scoring that piece of 5.5 by 8.5 in half. And I'll also trim off a 1/4 of an inch on one of the sides of the card base. For my second piece of paper, I'll score this piece at a 1/4 of an inch, 4 1/4, and 5.5, which creates the tunnel for the card inside. And I'll use my Teflon bone folder just to make sure that all those score lines are reinforced and this folds properly and fits inside the card. So once I have my tunnel card, I know that I want to have a circular tunnel. So I'm grabbing one of my Hero Arts Infinity Circle dies to cut out that circle. For the inside of the card, I knew that I wanted to create a galaxy theme. To make it easier, I use a piece of painter's tape just to mask off the other half of the card so ink doesn't get everywhere. I'm using Distress Oxide inks since they show up nicely on dark cardstock, and I'm using 4 colors and randomly placing it everywhere. To finish it off, I'm adding black soot to it and then using Copic opaque white paint, mixed with a little water and splattering it everywhere. So that creates the galaxy scene that I want for the back of the card. I'm also doing that to the front of the card, and I'm using my glass mat just so I can line up my painter's tape to mask off where I want the strip of the galaxy to appear. And for the front, it's the same exact process that I did for the inside of the card. I'm using the exact same colors and adding the black soot to finish it off, and also adding the splatter for the stars. I wanted to add the galaxy to the front just to give it a little something extra, and also it keeps the card thin because we do have the tunnel inside of the card. So once I finish the galaxy portion, I'll remove the mask and I'll move on to the little slider mechanism that I'm creating for the astronaut. I trim a strip of white paper. It's about 3/4 inch wide, and I'm basically folding it into a little U shape. And this will just be able to lay flat when you close the card, and it allows the astronaut to look like he's floating because a piece of string will be holding him up. And so I'm using my Teflon bone folder to make sure that I have that U shape. And when I do, I'll trim it off and I'll add score tape to the two sides of the U. So I'll add it directly to the astronaut, and once I have that ready, I can string through the piece of Singer's sewing string that I have. And this string is translucent, so you can't really see it unless you're actively looking for it. And it'll let the astronaut look like he's floating back and forth in the galaxy. And I think it adds a very cool effect to the card. And so once I have that string trimmed down, I'll tape the two ends of the string down using scotch tape to the front of the tunnel where the circle is. Then I can go ahead and adhere this tunnel inside the card. I'm adding adhesive to the back portion of that tunnel and adding it to the card. And once I do that, I'll add score tape to the little quarter fold, and I'll remove that tape and close the card on it. And so this closes perfectly flat, and it's a relatively thin card for something that has a 3D element to it. For the inside of the card, I'm taking all those pieces that I had previously colored and arranging it so I know where everything is going to go. And to adhere it to the card, I'm using Tombow Mono Multi Glue to do so. I really like using liquid adhesive for these kind of things, so I can put it down, and if I change my mind, I can kind of move it around. I try not to move it around too much because the Tombow Monomote glue doesn't dry matte, and it kind of leaves a bit of a shiny look to it. So I only move it maybe very slightly. For the outside of the card, the astronaut that's holding the balloons has a little bit of white space peeking through the balloon strings, and so I decided just to trim them off and separate the balloons from the astronaut. I can draw in those balloon strings later. For the sentiment, I choose one from the set, and I believe this one says, "You mean the world to me." I'm stamping it on a thin sentiment strip, and I like to tape down the strip in my Misty so nothing moves. And I'm using Distress Oxide ink to stamp that in a blue so it matches the card. I'll trim it down so that I can make sure that it stays flush with the fold of the card, and I can trim any of the excess that's hanging over. But I'll add score tape to this just to make it easy, and once I have everything lined up, I'll make sure that it's straight and adhere it directly to the card. So I can just go ahead and trim off the excess using a pair of scissors, and I'll only need to add my astronaut. For the stars, I added a bit of shimmer ink, and so it's kind of glittery, and I'll add a little accent to it, the balloons as well, using a white gel pen. So for the astronaut himself, I didn't want it to look different from the stamp set, so I actually go ahead and stamp the balloon lines down so I know exactly where to draw them in. I will be putting the astronauts directly over where I stamped it, so no one will even know. This just helps me with those balloon lines and for it to look exactly like the stamp. So I'll tape down the astronaut and then add the balloons. And I decide to go in using a white Jelly Roll pen for the balloon strings since it's dark navy cardstock. And when I had stamped it in black, you could see that it didn't show up at all. It was really hard to see, and I didn't want the balloons just to be floating randomly because someone couldn't see the black lines holding it up. So as I'm playing with the inside of the card, I realized I didn't use my rocket, and there was no real place for it on the outside without it looking awkward. So I decided to put it in the empty space on the inside right of the card, and that completes the card. I do go back with my white pen just to make sure that those balloon strings are dark enough. But isn't this card pretty cool that the astronaut can float back and forth and you can't really see the string? I think that this is a cool effect to the tunnel card and I made it my own. Thank you for stopping by, and I hope you enjoyed today's card. I hope you try it out as well, and I'll see you guys next time for another video. Bye!